This is a 1995 Nissan 240sx, and in the mid-90s, your hairdresser might have been driving a Miata, but her boss was driving one of these. This particular example is a base model with the 5-speed manual transmission, which in 1995 would have cost you $16,000. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, that's about $30,000 in today's money, and that's what it took to get you into Nissan's entry-level sports coupe. It's a little depressing if you think about it too long, so let's move on. Now, as far as the exterior styling goes, it's all very subtle. According to Nissan, this car was marketed toward higher level female executives, and as such you have very subdued lines and rounded corners. This was the generation when Nissan really started to get away from the angular and futuristic design language of the 80s. And I feel it's all very reminiscent of the R33 Skyline of the same generation, but with its similar side profile and window shape. I feel like it was meant to be a more low-key alternative to the more muscular lines of the GTR. Under the hood of Nissan's 1995 240sx, you have the legendary, for all the wrong reasons, K24DE engine. This is a revised version from the S13 with most of the changes taking place in the updated electronics, more streamlined wiring, and slight differences to the intake manifold and camshafts. All these changes didn't really make a difference to the S14's humble power output of 155 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque, which in real life translated to something more like 120 horsepower and 130 pound-feet of torque. This was adequate and even competitive compared to other non-turbo competitors of the time. But for more performance-minded enthusiasts, this just wasn't quite up to par, with most people opting to add in turbochargers to make some more impressive numbers. This was where a lot of these engines met their downfall, as the KA was never inherently built to handle boost. With their cast pistons, you were on borrowed time before the engine would inevitably crack a ringland and cut your fun short behind the local Walmart. Now on to the interior features and quirks of the 1995 Nissan 240sx. First off, you'll notice the lack of an automatic transmission, because this is a base model and you were expected to change your own gears, unlike today where you're expected to pay a premium for the privilege. And you'll also notice a plethora of luxury sport appointments such as power windows, power locks, power sunroof, air conditioning, a CD player, cloth seats, and of course, a cup holder that you had to buy aftermarket and pay more for. All of these made the 240sx a very well-appointed and competitive sports car for its time. All right, driving the 1995 Nissan 240sx. First thing I gotta say is this is not a low-mileage, well-kept, near-perfect example of an S14. This is a very high-mileage, well-kept, near-perfect example of an S14. This car has 423,000 miles. And from my first impressions, you wouldn't guess that it has that kind of mileage. It still drives just like you would expect it to. Really smooth idle, no shakiness or anything like that. Still has a good amount of power, as much as a K24 can have. The car still handles really well, other than I'm pretty sure that the front left shock is blown, because for one, there's a clunky noise coming from the front left, and it's also a little floaty. The other shocks still feel pretty normal though. And there's also a clunking noise coming from the back, which kind of feels to me like a transmission mount, maybe subframe bushings or something like that. That's something we'll have to check into later. Yeah, rev matching in this car is not easy. This is still in the era where cable throttle was pretty prominent in most cars, and the throttle response just isn't there. You really got to hammer on the throttle to get it to come up. Between gears, every time you're slipping the clutch, it also feels like there's some shuddering going on, which may have something to do with, like I said before, maybe the transmission mount or something along those lines. The AC still works. Everything in this car still works, with this, which is fascinating for it being this high mileage. It's not fast, I gotta say that. This motor was great because it has a lot of torque, and that's really what matters. That's what moves the car, that's what gets you around. But the lack of horsepower means that it just doesn't have the power to keep going in the top end. So for a daily driver, it's pretty good just for commuting around town and maybe some highway trips. That's perfectly fine for that. As far as race car duties, it's a little lacking. Like I said before, you're lucky if you got 120 horsepower out of this thing, 130 pound-feet of torque in stock form anyway. hell, maybe even with some mods, it's still pretty low. But that about does it for our first impressions. Back to the garage. Welcome back to Garage 23. Hope you guys liked our little homage to Doug DeMuro. I've been wanting to do that for quite a while, and our new S14 was the perfect subject. This was not planned in the least. I just happened to come across this while I was making fun of John for being too responsible and not having had a race car in the past few years. I was looking through OfferUp for a 240 to send him, and I came across this. He decided to pass on it, but the more I kept looking at the ad, the more it started looking like a good idea. So I messaged the guy, and he already had a couple buyers lined up, but I happened to be a lot closer to him, so I went to check the car out. Well, now it's here. So yeah, we have a whole new project on our hands when we weren't done with any of the other ones.
At this point, I'm kind of worried about him.
But like I said before, this one is a really well-kept example. It's super high mileage though. It's got 423,000 miles, which is the highest 240 I've ever seen. The only other high mileage 240 I've seen is an S13 back when I was like 20 that had 389,000 miles. And that one was nowhere near this nice. But besides the mileage, the only other things that we gotta check out are the front suspension. There's some clunking noises, and it's really floaty when you're driving around. So I'm pretty sure the front shock, at least the left, is blown. Maybe the right too, I'm not sure. There's something up with the rear suspension because there's some clunking on takeoff and some shuddering in between shifting gears. So that's another thing we gotta check out. Probably the only thing on this whole car that doesn't work is the stereo, which is super common for S14s. They have a factory audio amplifier in the trunk, and they're super tiny and they always break. So usually you just end up having to cut them out and splice the wires together, which is what I did on my first S14. This one I want to do something a little more refined than that, not just electrical tape around some wires. Other than that, the major issue is that this car was rear-ended, which is the reason we got such a good deal on it. But it's also the reason it's the restored title. So the main issue is getting the rear bumper damage fixed. And from that, there's a little bit of damage on the rear quarter panels. Got a little bit of a list ahead of us, so let's get started and check it out. So we actually already got the trunk fixed. So the second day I had the car, I just took it to my buddy's shop because he has a frame puller, and I just had him fix the trunk for us. But yeah, it actually works now. So big thanks to Jesse's Auto Body in Phoenix for helping us out with this. They were able to get most of the damage fixed, but there's still a little bit of crumpling in the tire well. So yeah, a little bit over here still. But in all, it's back to its more or less original shape. The main issue was that the trunk didn't close before. If you guys will see in some of the footage we were taking when we first got the car, the trunk just wouldn't close. It would stay like that open. So that was really inconvenient, but it actually closes now. That's another thing I want to take care of is the little rubber pieces that go in between the trunk, this part of the trunk. These always end up getting really stiff and end up breaking. So like this one's already broken off on the center. So these could be replaced, and this will also take care of any rattling that you'll have when you're driving. I know this is really common on S13s too, when the little rubbers on the hatch either break or fall off or get super hard like this. It'll start to rattle a lot, which this one you can hear too when you're driving. There's like a little bit of this going on. So yeah, it's pretty annoying. So I think that's gonna be something we add to our list. And then another side effect of this damage is that the rear quarter panels, they weren't hit in the accident, but because the bumper was pushed in so far, that was enough to kind of buckle the quarter panels a little bit. On the driver's side, it's not really that deep at all. You can't even really notice it sometimes, but It is slightly sunken in here, but on the passenger side, it's a bit worse. If you take the interior plastic off the back seat area, there's actually a big opening in the frame here where you can get to the inside of the quarter panel. So I'm hoping that's enough to let us try and fix this a little better. And then we'll do the same on the other side. The other side, we probably just need to push it out by hand, and that should be enough to get it back straight. But the other issue on our list was the clunking in the rear suspension. I'm pretty sure it's either like a transmission mount or maybe subframe bushings or something like that. Because whenever you're slipping the clutch, like in between gears, there's like a shudder that you feel. So it kind of feels like one of the motor mounts or transmission mount or something just isn't secured quite right. So we need to check that out first. So. All right, so on the rear subframe so far, what I wanted to check was the subframe bushings. And it actually looks like this car's already got polyurethane bushings or something, because I'm pretty sure that's not stock. Yeah, it's like that on all of them. So I'm pretty sure these are probably energy suspension polyurethane bushings, which that's super cool. That's a nice upgrade. And the diff bushings also seem to be in good shape. The rubber's there at least. Look how much play we got before the wheels even start to move. Yeah, that's not normal. Also, there's a lot of oil all over the diff. So I'm willing to bet that this thing's been leaking for a long time and they never really noticed. And the insides are probably way more worn than they should be. So probably need a new diff. The other thing I wanted to check was the transmission mount, which we might be able to get to from further in front. So let's check that. All right, so if we try to pry on the transmission mount, it wiggles a little bit, but I think this is still a stock mount, so it's rubber. It doesn't feel like it's disconnected though, so I think it's all right. So we can roll that out. All right, so that concludes our little inspection here. The car looks to be in pretty good shape. We do have some things to buy though, at least a front shock, maybe coilovers. I don't know if there's budget for that, but luckily we don't have to buy subframe bushings or anything like that. We might do the motor mounts and transmission mount just in case. Upgraded some polyurethane ones at least or something. The rubbers for the trunk and hood would be a good idea. Start fixing the dents and the stereo. So we've got a little bit of work ahead of us. We initially bought this to try and resell it since we got it at a pretty good price, but we're starting to get a little attached to it. So we're not sure if we should just keep this on and add it to the fleet. So yeah, tell us what you think in the comments. Should we keep it? Should we restore it? Resell it? Let us know. See you guys next time.